I woke to the sound of my phone ringing at 2:17 a.m. Fumbling in the darkness, I answered the call without checking who it was. The voice of my night shift manager instantly cleared the fog of sleep from my mind. "Boss, you're not going to believe this. I just got a call to tow a truck from Oak Ridge Estates. When I arrived, I realized it's your Ford F-350. I sat bolt upright in bed. My truck? From my own driveway? Yes, sir. There's a woman here with the HOA who's insisting we take it, says it violates some commercial vehicle ordinance. I recognized your address and wanted to check before doing anything." I rubbed my eyes, trying to process this absurdity. Who from the HOA is there at 2 in the morning? Says her name is Patricia Winters, HOA president. She's got 2 board members with her taking photos. Of course it was Patricia. For 6 months since I moved into Oak Ridge Estates, she'd been on a mission to make my life miserable. First, it was notices about my grass being half an inch too tall, then complaints about my trash cans being visible from the street. But this middle-of-the-night towing ambush was a new low. "Tell her you need to call your supervisor for approval," I said. "I'll be there in 5 minutes." I threw on jeans and a sweatshirt, grabbed my keys, and headed out the front door. My house was at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, and even in the dark, I could see the tow truck's flashing lights at the edge of my driveway. 3 figures stood beside it, one gesturing animatedly. As I approached, Patricia's shrill voice cut through the night air. "This is ridiculous. You were contracted by our HOA specifically to remove vehicles like this without question. I want to speak to your supervisor immediately." My night manager, Mike, was standing his ground. "Ma'am, I've already called him. He's on his way." "At this hour? This is completely unprofessional." I cleared my throat as I walked up. "Good evening, Patricia." She spun around, her face illuminated by the tow truck's headlights. A surprise flashed across her features before she composed herself. "Mr. Reynolds, how convenient that you're awake. We're in the process of enforcing HOA regulations regarding commercial vehicles." I nodded calmly. "At 2 a.m.? Violations can be addressed at any time according to our bylaws," she replied, lifting her chin defiantly. The 2 men with her, I recognized them as board members Fred Thompson and Dave Wilson, shuffled uncomfortably. "And what violation exactly is my truck committing?" I asked, walking over to my perfectly parked Ford F-350. It was clean, well-maintained, and parked fully within my own driveway. Patricia consulted her ever-present clipboard. Section 7.3 of the covenant clearly states that commercial vehicles cannot be parked in residential driveways. Your truck has your company logo on it, making it a commercial vehicle. She pointed to the modest Reynolds Towing and Recovery logo on my truck's door. The irony was apparently lost on her. "I see," I said. "And you called Reynolds Towing to remove a Reynolds Towing truck." Mike suppressed a smile beside me. Fred and Dave exchanged glances. Patricia didn't miss a beat. "The company name is irrelevant. The rules apply to everyone." "Actually, Patricia, the rules do matter, especially when you're breaking several of them right now." I turned to Mike. "Could you please explain to Miss Winters who owns Reynolds Towing and Recovery?" Mike grinned openly now. "That would be you, sir. James Reynolds, owner and CEO since 2011. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Fred took a small step back, suddenly very interested in the ground beneath his feet. "You called my company to tow my truck from my property," I stated flatly. "Not only that, but you're conducting HOA business at 2 a.m., which violates county noise ordinances and harassment statutes." "This is some kind of setup," Patricia sputtered. "How are we supposed to know you owned the towing company?" "You could have read the name on the truck," Mike suggested helpfully. "Or the name on my mailbox, which matches the company name," I added. "Or you could have simply addressed any concerns during normal business hours like a reasonable person." Dave Wilson finally spoke up. "Patricia, maybe we should continue this discussion at the next board meeting." She silenced him with a glare. "We're enforcing the rules as we're entitled to do." I pulled out my phone. "Let me make sure I understand. You're claiming my truck is a commercial vehicle and can't be parked in my driveway, correct?" "Exactly," Patricia said, finding her footing again. "Section 7.3 clearly—" "Let me stop you there," I interrupted, scrolling through my phone. "Because I have here the exact wording of Section 7.3 of our covenant. It states, and I quote, 'No commercial vehicles over 10,000 pounds gross vehicle weight may be parked overnight in residential driveways.'" "My truck weighs 8,500 pounds? Fred coughed nervously. "Patricia, maybe we should—" Furthermore, I continued, the covenant defines commercial vehicles as vehicles primarily used for business purposes. This is my personal vehicle that happens to have my company logo on it. I drive it to and from work just like Dave here drives his realtor-branded Lexus. Dave suddenly became very interested in the stars above. But most importantly, I said, my voice hardening, HOA enforcement actions cannot legally take place between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. without an emergency justification. It's in the state property code. My parked truck hardly constitutes an emergency. Patricia's face was turning an interesting shade of red, visible even in the dim light. The board has discretion to interpret and enforce. The board has obligations to follow the law, I corrected. And right now, you're breaking several. Harassment, disturbing the peace, attempted theft, and abuse of HOA authority. I turned to Mike. Would you mind recording this on your phone? I think we might need it later. Mike already had his phone out. Been recording since you arrived, boss. Patricia finally seemed to realize the situation she'd created. This is absurd. We're simply doing our job at 2 a.m. with no notice? Attempting to tow a vehicle that doesn't violate any regulations? I shook my head. I don't think so. This feels personal, Patricia. Don't flatter yourself, she snapped, but her voice lacked conviction. I've been wondering why you've targeted me with violations since I moved in, I said. At first, I thought it might be because my house is one of the few without ridiculous landscaping fees from your brother's company, Green Dreams Land. Her eyes widened slightly. I'd done my homework. Or maybe it's because I declined to use your husband's insurance agency for my company's policy renewal last month, I continued. Either way, this pattern of harassment stops tonight. Fred and Dave were now standing several feet away from Patricia, physically distancing themselves. Here's what happens next, I said. My truck stays exactly where it is, on my property, violating no regulations. You three leave immediately. And tomorrow, the HOA board will receive my formal complaint documenting this incident and all previous targeted harassment, along with a cease and desist letter from my attorney. You can't just... Patricia began. I absolutely can, I said firmly. And one more thing, Reynolds Towing and Recovery will be terminating its contract with Oak Ridge Estates HOA. Effective immediately, you'll need to find another towing company willing to conduct middle-of-the-night harassment campaigns. Mike was grinning openly now. Fred and Dave were already backing away toward their vehicles. This isn't over, Reynolds, Patricia hissed. I smiled. Actually, Patricia, I think it is, but the investigation into HOA financial improprieties? That's just beginning. That last part was a shot in the dark, but the way her face paled told me I'd hit a nerve. By 7 a.m. the next morning, my attorney had delivered a formal complaint and cease and desist letter to every HOA board member. By noon, my phone was buzzing with calls from neighbors who had experienced similar harassment from Patricia's reign of terror. Jason Kim from 2 doors down had been fined $500 for having a basketball hoop that was 2 inches too tall. Maria Gonzalez had received violation notices for hanging traditional Mexican decorations during her daughter's quinceañera. Robert Chen had been threatened with legal action for installing solar panels, despite state laws explicitly protecting homeowners' rights to renewable energy. The pattern was clear. If you didn't use services from businesses connected to Patricia's family, you became a target. After talking with 15 neighbors with similar stories, I called an emergency community meeting at my home for that evening. 38 homeowners crowded into my living room and kitchen, eager to share their experiences. I provided copies of the HOA financial statements I'd obtained as a homeowner, and together we found some interesting patterns. The HOA's landscaping contract with Green Dreams charged 3 times the market rate. The insurance policy through Patricia's husband's agency carried premiums 40% above comparable policies. And most troubling, the violation fees collected over $120,000 last year alone weren't fully accounted for in the HOA's official bank statements. By meeting's end, we had formed a committee to investigate further and planned to call for a special election to replace the board. The neighbors, who had once been too intimidated to stand up individually, were now finding strength in numbers. 2 days later, as I was leaving for work, I noticed a moving truck in front of Patricia's house. Fred Thompson, looking nervous, was walking his dog nearby. "Morning, Fred," I called out. "Something happening at the Winters residence." He glanced around before responding. Patricia's husband got a sudden job offer in Arizona. They're leaving by the weekend. That's awfully quick, I remarked. Fred lowered his voice. Between us, I think your mention of financial impropriety spooked them. Dave and I started asking questions about the accounts after that night, and suddenly Patricia's resigning and moving cross-country. I nodded. And the missing violation fees? We can't find records for about $40,000, he admitted. The board's meeting tonight to discuss hiring a forensic accountant. 3 weeks later, with Patricia gone and a new interim board in place, Oak Ridge Estates held its first community picnic in the common area. Children played on the newly repaired playground equipment, neighbors chatted over hamburgers and hot dogs, and there wasn't a clipboard or violation notice in sight. Maria Gonzalez approached me as I was flipping burgers on the grill. My cousin just moved into the Winters' old house, she said. She was worried about all the HOA horror stories I used to tell, but I assured her things have changed. Definitely for the better, I agreed, handing her a plate. Mike from my towing company arrived with his family joining the celebration. Boss, you won't believe what happened yesterday, he said between bites of potato salad. Got a call from an HOA over in Riverside, wanted us to tow a bunch of cars during their community festival because some residents had guests parked on the street. What did you tell them? I asked. He grinned. I said Reynolds Towing doesn't do HOA enforcement anymore. We've found it's bad for community relations. As the sun set on our neighborhood gathering, I looked around at the smiling faces and animated conversation. My truck was parked prominently in my driveway, company logo gleaming in the evening light. No one cared. In fact, several neighbors had asked for my business cards, looking for a towing company they could trust. Sometimes it takes a middle-of-the-night confrontation to wake up a community. In our case, an HOA president's vendetta against my truck had accidentally revealed a system of corruption and favoritism that had been hurting everyone for years. Patricia had aimed to tow away my vehicle, but instead, she'd towed away her own power and the culture of fear she'd created. The new HOA president, Maria Gonzalez, walked to the center of the gathering and clinked a glass for attention. I'd like to propose a toast, she announced. To good neighbors, fair rules, and no more 2 a.m. towing adventures. Everyone laughed and raised their glasses. As we celebrated our reformed community, I couldn't help but appreciate the irony. Patricia Winters had finally succeeded in removing something from Oak Ridge Estates. Herself.